The infinite darkness of the Sigma Quadrant trembled with the echoes of a war that had consumed generations. Plasma storms raged between massive alien warships, their hulls scarred by centuries of continuous conflict. The Galactic Alliance, a tenuous coalition of 12 distinct species, fought with the desperation of civilizations that had long since forgotten the meaning of peace. Commander Zarek of the Crystalline Cortex watched the battle unfold from the command deck of the Resonant Spire, his translucent form shifting with barely contained anxiety. Holographic displays flickered with tactical data, each moment bringing new casualties. The Void Collective's biomechanical assault ships pressed their advantage, their living weapon systems consuming entire squadrons of Alliance defenders. Quantum breach detected, announced the ship's AI in a monotone that failed to capture the gravity of the moment. Spatial anomaly forming in Sector 9. Zarek's crystalline structure rippled with concern. Spatial anomalies were not uncommon in this war-torn region of space, but something about this one felt different. The sensor arrays began to pulse with an energy signature that defied every known classification system. Across the battlefield, communication channels erupted with confusion. Alien commanders from a dozen different species began broadcasting simultaneously, their universal translators struggling to convey the mix of terror and bewilderment. "What is that?" demanded a Krell-Thuri war captain, her serpentine form coiling around her command interface. The anomaly grew, not with the violent expansion typical of quantum rifts, but with a precision that seemed almost deliberate. Sensor readings showed impossible calculations, algorithms that shifted and adapted faster than any known computational system could process. It was as if the very fabric of space was being analyzed, understood, and then carefully moved aside. A single vessel emerged. No weapon signatures charged, no approach vectors detected. It simply existed. The ship was unlike anything in the known galactic catalogs. Its hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with subtle geometric patterns that suggested more than mere engineering. It looked almost like a living thing, designed with a logic that transcended traditional spacecraft construction. Identification impossible, the AI reported, a hint of uncertainty in its synthesized voice. Commander Zarek moved closer to the primary viewing screen. His species had developed advanced sensory capabilities over millennia of space exploration, but this vessel challenged everything he understood about interstellar technology. The ship's exterior seemed to shimmer slightly, not from any recognizable cloaking technology, but as if its very molecular structure was in a constant state of subtle reconfiguration. Tactical officers across the Alliance fleet began charging weapons, their fingers hovering over trigger mechanisms. Decades of conflict had taught them that an unidentified vessel was rarely a harbinger of peace. But something was different this time. The new arrival made no aggressive moves. It simply existed at the heart of the most intense battle sector, surrounded by thousands of warships from multiple civilizations. Its presence created a strange calm, as if the very energy of the conflict was being subtly redirected. Quantum scanners began returning impossible data. The ship's computational core seemed to be analyzing the entire battlefield simultaneously, not just tracking weapon systems or ship movements, but understanding the complex political, strategic, and even emotional dynamics of the conflict. Commander Zarek felt something he had not experienced in generations of warfare: curiosity. "Open a universal communication channel," he instructed the ship's eye. "All frequencies, all translation protocols." The silence that followed was more profound than any weapon discharge. 12 alien species, locked in a conflict that had consumed countless worlds, found themselves united in a single moment of collective uncertainty. Something had changed. The Phantom ship had arrived. The communication protocols of the Galactic Alliance were a complex web of quantum-encrypted channels, developed over centuries to ensure precise interspecies communication. These systems had weathered countless conflicts, translated between beings with vastly different cognitive structures, and maintained diplomatic relations across incomprehensible biological differences. They were about to meet their greatest challenge: Captain Elena Rodriguez adjusted the quantum resonance communicator, her fingers moving with a precision that spoke of countless hours of preparation. The bridge of the U.S. Defiance hummed with a quiet intensity that was distinctly different from the chaotic battle spaces of the alien fleets. Initiating first contact protocol, she announced to her bridge crew. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the ship's communication specialist, ran final calibrations. The human team moved with a synchronicity that seemed almost preternatural, each action smooth, each movement purposeful. Unlike the rigid command structures of the alien civilizations, the human crew operated like a single adaptive organism. The first transmission burst across the quantum channels carried more than just words. It contained layers of information, mathematical proofs, quantum signatures, and computational keys that would take most alien civilizations decades to fully decode. Attention Galactic Alliance and Void Collective. Rodriguez's voice cut through the communication channels. This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the United Earth Diplomatic and Exploration Command. We are initiating a comprehensive conflict resolution protocol. The alien commanders froze. On the crystalline Cortex's command deck, Commander Zarek felt a vibration that went beyond physical sensation. The transmission carried an undertone that suggested something more than simple communication. It was as if the very fabric of the message was a form of negotiation. The Krelthari war captain, whose serpentine form was coiled around her communication interface, hissed in confusion. Her species had developed advanced linguistic algorithms that could detect even the most subtle nuances of communication. Yet this human transmission defied everything in their extensive databases. Analyzing, her ship's AI reported, communication contains multiple simultaneous information layers, computational complexity exceeding known communication protocols by factor of 7,893. Across the fleet, translation systems began to struggle. The human message was not just a simple communication. It was a complex computational problem that required simultaneous processing on multiple cognitive levels. Lieutenant Chen monitored the alien responses, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "Captain," he reported, "their communication systems are struggling to process our transmission. We're seeing adaptive response patterns that suggest complete technological recalibration." Rodriguez allowed herself a slight smile. This was exactly what they had prepared for. The message continued, delivering a precise breakdown of the current conflict. But it wasn't a simple historical summary. The transmission included predictive models, potential resolution scenarios, and a comprehensive analysis of the psychological and strategic motivations of each species involved in the conflict. Commander Zarek watched in astonishment as the human transmission began to reveal layers of the conflict that even the longest-serving Alliance strategists had never comprehended. It was as if the humans had been studying this war from a perspective that transcended traditional intelligence gathering. The Void Collective's communication arrays began to show signs of significant stress. Their computational systems, once considered the most advanced in the known galaxy, were being systematically challenged by the depth and complexity of the human transmission. Conflict resolution probability models now active, the Defiance's AI reported quietly. What the alien civilizations didn't realize was that this transmission was more than a communication. It was the first move in a complex strategic intervention that had been decades in the making. Each quantum-encrypted burst carried not just information, but the potential for a fundamental restructuring of galactic relations. The silence that followed was more profound than any weapon discharge. First contact had begun. The sensor arrays of the Galactic Alliance began their most intricate analysis in centuries. What they discovered about the human vessel defied every known principle of spacecraft design and technological development. Dr. Lyra Voss, the lead xenotechnological analyst of the crystalline cortex, ran her fifth consecutive diagnostic scan. Her crystalline form vibrated with a mixture of frustration and unprecedented excitement. The U.S. Defiance was not just a ship. It was a living computational ecosystem that challenged everything known about technological development. "Impossible," she muttered, reviewing the data streams. The ship's systems operated on principles that seemed to blur the line between technology and living intelligence. Where alien civilizations designed specialized systems with rigid functions, the human vessel demonstrated something entirely different. Its computational core adapted with a fluidity that suggested nearly organic intelligence, yet constructed with a precision that was distinctly technological. Each system within the U.S. Defiance existed in a state of constant evolution. Weapon arrays could reconfigure themselves millisecond by millisecond, anticipating potential threat vectors before they fully materialized. Defensive systems didn't just respond to attacks. They predicted, analyzed, and neutralized potential threats through layers of computational prediction that seemed to bend the very laws of probability. Lieutenant Marcus Chen monitored the external scans, his fingers moving across holographic interfaces with practiced ease. "The aliens are completely misunderstanding our technological approach," he reported to Captain Rodriguez. "They're trying to categorize our systems using linear computational models." The truth was far more complex. The U.S. Defiance represented a radical departure from traditional spacecraft design. Its hull was not merely a protective shell, but an adaptive computational membrane. Nanoscale technologies woven into its structure could reorganize molecular bonds instantaneously, allowing the ship to respond to environmental challenges with unprecedented flexibility. Sensor systems worked in ways that defied traditional understanding. Instead of passive detection, the ship's arrays created dynamic computational fields that could literally reshape the informational landscape around it. It wasn't just collecting data, it was actively engaging with and transforming the electromagnetic environment. "Computational recursion detected," announced the ship's AI, its voice carrying an almost playful undertone of scientific curiosity. Dr. Voss watched in astonishment as the human vessel's systems seemed to communicate with each other in a language that transcended traditional technological interfaces. Quantum entanglement principles were being used in ways her civilization had only theorized about. Each system didn't just perform a function. It collaborated, predicted, and evolved in real time. The weapon systems were particularly bewildering. Unlike the specialized offensive technologies of the alien fleets, the U.S. Defiance's armaments were computational platforms that could adapt their entire operational matrix within nanoseconds. A defensive shield could become an offensive weapon. A communication array could transform into a precision targeting system. Commander Zarek observed the analysis with growing understanding. The human approach represented something more than technological superiority. It was a fundamentally different way of conceptualizing technological interaction. "They don't see technology as a tool," he murmured to his senior analysts. "They see it as a living, adaptive ecosystem." The ship's computational core processed information across multiple simultaneous dimensions. Where alien AI systems followed predetermined algorithmic paths, the U.S. Defiance's systems created new computational pathways in real time. It was learning, not just processing, expanding its understanding with each microsecond of interaction. Quantum entanglement communication systems allowed instantaneous information transfer that made the alien fleet's communication technologies seem primitive by comparison. The human vessel could analyze entire battlefield scenarios, predict potential outcomes, and develop strategic responses faster than the combined computational power of entire alien civilizations. Dr. Voss realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This was not just a technologically advanced spacecraft. It was a glimpse into an entirely different technological philosophy, one that viewed technology as a dynamic, living system capable of continuous self-improvement and adaptation. The U.S. Defiance represented more than a weapon or a diplomatic instrument. It was a statement, a profound declaration of humanity's unique approach to technological development. And the galaxy was about to be transformed. The Stellar Imperium's most feared battle group approached with a confidence born of centuries of warfare. 12 massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, moved in a perfect geometric formation that had broken the backs of countless resistance movements. Their weapon systems represented the pinnacle of alien military technology. Quantum disruptors capable of shattering planetary cores, gravimetric cannons that could crush entire fleet formations. They were about to meet their match. Captain Elena Rodriguez studied the incoming formation with a calm that bordered on serenity. Her bridge crew moved with a synchronicity that suggested they were extensions of a single adaptive intelligence. Lieutenant Marcus Chen's fingers danced across holographic interfaces, creating computational models that anticipated the alien fleet's every potential movement. Incoming formation, announced the ship's eye. Threat assessment, maximum potential. The U.S. Defiance didn't move like a traditional warship. It seemed to flow through space, its very existence a challenge to conventional understanding of spatial dynamics. As the stellar Imperium's dreadnoughts charged their primary weapon systems, something extraordinary began to happen. Quantum disruption waves emerged from the human vessel, not as weapons, but as informational fields that began to rewrite the very computational foundations of the approaching fleet. The dreadnought's targeting systems began to see phantom threats, their computational cores flooded with billions of simultaneous potential scenarios. Computational interference initiated, reported Lieutenant Chen, a subtle smile crossing his face. The first volley from the alien dreadnoughts should have been devastating. Quantum disruptor beams capable of unraveling molecular bonds burst forth. But they found nothing. The U.S. Defiance seemed simply not exist where the weapons were aimed. It was more than simple evasion. The ship was actively manipulating the very fabric of perceived space. Commander Zarek watched from the crystalline cortex, his translucent form vibrating with a mixture of terror and scientific fascination. The human vessel was doing something impossible. It wasn't just avoiding attacks, it was fundamentally altering the computational landscape of the battle. Holographic warfare systems erupted from the U.S. Defiance. These were not simple visual deceptions, but complex computational projections that could interact with enemy systems. Entire squadrons of alien fighters found themselves fighting phantoms, their targeting systems overwhelmed by layers of simultaneous potential realities. Adaptive response protocol, Captain Rodriguez called out, her voice calm and measured. The ship's weapon systems came to life, but not in any way the alien fleet could comprehend. Instead of traditional energy weapons or physical projectiles, the U.S. Defiance began to emit computational fields that actively rewrote the operational parameters of the enemy fleet. Gravimetric cannons that should have crushed entire sections of space found themselves redirected. The laws of physics seemed to bend around the human vessel, not through brute force, but through an almost elegant computational manipulation. In 17 minutes and 23 seconds, the entire stellar Imperium battle group ceased to exist as a functional fighting force. No ships were physically destroyed. No crews were killed. They simply found themselves completely unable to operate as a cohesive military unit. Weapon systems failed. Communication networks collapsed. Navigation computers became nothing more than complex paperweights. Battle complete, the ship's air reported, with what almost seemed like a hint of professional satisfaction. Lieutenant Chen completed his final computational analysis. 100% mission objective achieved. 0 human casualties. Minimal structural damage to enemy vessels. The alien observers were stunned into complete silence. Commander Zarek realized they were witnessing something more than a military engagement. This was a fundamental demonstration of a completely different approach to conflict, one that viewed warfare not as destruction, but as a complex computational problem to be solved. The U.S. Defiance had not just won a battle, it had redefined the very concept of military engagement, and the galaxy would never be the same. The diplomatic chambers of the Galactic Alliance had seen countless negotiations, but nothing prepared them for this moment. Representatives from 12 different species found themselves gathered in a massive quantum conference space, their communication interfaces struggling to process the depth of information presented by the human delegation. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, her presence creating a gravitational pull that transcended physical space. Behind her, holographic displays began to unfold a narrative that would challenge everything the assembled civilizations understood about their own conflict. "We have been observing your war for 73 standard galactic cycles," she began, her voice carrying a calm that felt almost impossible given the magnitude of the statement. The crystalline cortex representative, Commander Zarek, felt his molecular structure vibrate with a mixture of anticipation and growing understanding. The humans had not simply arrived. They had been preparing for this moment for generations. Holographic displays began to show intricate timelines. Each projection contained layers of information that went far beyond simple historical records. They revealed the complex psychological, economic, and strategic threads that had maintained the conflict between the Galactic Alliance and the Void Collective. Lieutenant Marcus Chen managed the computational displays, his fingers moving with a precision that suggested the interfaces were extensions of his own cognitive processes. Each moment of the presentation revealed another layer of complexity, showing how seemingly independent conflicts were actually interconnected through subtle manipulation of resources, communication channels, and strategic positioning. The Krelthari war captain, whose serpentine form was coiled around her communication interface, found herself unable to look away. The human presentation was dismantling the very foundation of their understanding of the war. "Your conflict is not about territorial expansion," Rodriguez continued. "It is a complex system of mutual interdependence that has been sustained through deliberate miscommunication and strategic misdirection." The presentation began to show computational models that demonstrated how each species had been manipulated by unseen systemic pressures. Economic dependencies, communication blockades, strategic misinformation, all carefully maintained to prevent true resolution. Commander Zarek realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The humans were not just presenting information, they were providing a comprehensive framework for understanding the true nature of the conflict. Quantum encrypted data streams began to flow, revealing communication channels that had been deliberately blocked, historical records that had been suppressed, economic dependencies that had forced continued conflict. The diplomatic chamber grew silent. "We are not here to declare victory," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying a depth that suggested generations of careful preparation. "We are here to provide a path to genuine resolution." The holographic displays began to show potential collaborative scenarios, not simple peace treaties, but comprehensive restructuring of galactic economic and communication systems. Each projection demonstrated how the various species could benefit from genuine cooperation. Lieutenant Chen's computational models showed hundreds of potential future scenarios. Unlike traditional predictive analysis, these projections were living, adaptive systems that could be adjusted in real time based on the reactions of the assembled representatives. The Void Collective's representatives found themselves unable to maintain their traditional defensive postures. The human presentation had stripped away decades of carefully constructed narrative, revealing the true complexity of their ongoing conflict. "Your war is a system," Rodriguez explained, "not a conflict between species, but a complex computational problem that has been deliberately maintained." Zarek understood now. The humans had not simply arrived to end a war. They had come to fundamentally restructure the way galactic civilizations understood conflict, communication, and cooperation. The diplomatic chamber was no longer just a meeting space. It had become a crucible of potential transformation. And the galaxy held its breath. Deep within the computational core of the U.S. Defiance, a network of algorithms began to unfold a plan decades in the making. This was more than a military intervention. It was a carefully constructed solution to a galactic conflict that had defied resolution for generations. Captain Elena Rodriguez studied the holographic displays that surrounded her command chair. Each projection represented a complex web of potential outcomes, living models that adapted in real time to the subtle shifts in galactic dynamics. "Preliminary restructuring protocols are now active," announced the ship's AI, its voice carrying a tone that suggested both precision and anticipation. The true purpose of human intervention began to reveal itself. The U.S. Defiance was not just a warship, it was a mobile diplomatic and strategic reconstruction platform. Its very existence challenged every fundamental assumption about conflict resolution that the alien civilizations had developed over millennia. Lieutenant Marcus Chen managed the computational interfaces, his fingers moving with a fluidity that suggested the technology was an extension of his own cognitive processes. Initial economic realignment models are showing promising stability projections, he reported. The intervention targeted the root causes of the conflict with surgical precision. Economic dependencies that had forced continuous warfare were systematically identified and restructured. Communication channels that had been deliberately blocked were reopened, allowing for genuine dialogue between species that had been enemies for generations. Commander Zarek of the crystalline cortex watched in growing understanding. The humans were not simply ending a war, they were redesigning the entire systemic framework that had sustained the conflict. Quantum communication networks began to shift. The U.S. Defiance acted as a central hub, creating new pathways of information exchange that bypassed traditional diplomatic barriers. It was as if the ship itself was a living diplomatic instrument, capable of identifying and resolving complex interspecies tensions. "We are addressing the fundamental computational error in your galactic relationship," Rodriguez explained during a subsequent diplomatic session. Her words carried a weight that went beyond simple rhetoric. The ship's systems began to implement what could only be described as a galactic reset. Economic models were recalibrated. Resource distribution algorithms were redesigned to eliminate the zero-sum game that had driven decades of conflict. Communication protocols were reconstructed to enable genuine understanding between species that had previously only known each other as enemies. Lieutenant Chen's computational models showed hundreds of potential future scenarios. Unlike traditional predictive analysis, these projections were living, adaptive systems that could be adjusted in real time based on the reactions of various galactic stakeholders. The Void Collective's representatives found themselves in an unprecedented position. The humans were not offering a traditional peace treaty. They were providing a comprehensive system of mutual cooperation that made previous conflict models obsolete. "Your war is a complex system of misaligned incentives," Rodriguez explained. "We are here to realign those incentives." Quantum entanglement communication networks began to reveal hidden connections. Economic dependencies that had been deliberately obscured were brought into the light. Species that had been manipulated into conflict began to understand the true nature of their antagonism. The U.S. Defiance's computational core worked on a level that transcended traditional understanding. It was not just processing information, it was creating new frameworks of interaction. Diplomatic protocols were rewritten. Economic models were reconstructed. Communication channels were fundamentally transformed. Commander Zarek realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The humans had approached the galactic conflict not as a military problem, but as a complex computational challenge to be solved. Systemic reconstruction protocols at 67% efficiency, the ship's AI reported. What the alien civilizations didn't realize was that this intervention was the result of generations of preparation. Humanity had been studying this conflict, understanding its nuances, preparing a solution that went far beyond traditional diplomatic or military approaches. The U.S. Defiance stood as a beacon of a fundamentally different approach to galactic relations. It was not a weapon of war, but an instrument of comprehensive systemic transformation. The turning point had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The transformation began in moments of surprising intimacy. Species that had once viewed each other only through the lens of military targeting now found themselves engaged in unprecedented dialogues. In a small diplomatic chamber aboard the U.S. Defiance, a Krelthuri war captain sat beside a crystalline cortex representative. Their communication interfaces, once designed solely for tactical coordination, now explored shared challenges that transcended centuries of conflict. Lieutenant Marcus Chen observed the interactions, his computational models tracking the subtle shifts in communication patterns. Each conversation was more than a simple exchange. It was a complex dance of understanding, facilitated by the ship's advanced translation and contextual analysis systems. Interpersonal connection algorithms showing positive correlation. The ship's AI reported quietly. Captain Elena Rodriguez understood that true conflict resolution happened not through grand gestures, but through individual moments of genuine connection. The U.S. Defiance had become more than a warship or a diplomatic platform. It was a catalyst for fundamental understanding. Economic analysts from previously opposing civilizations found themselves collaborating on resource optimization projects. Scientific teams that had once developed weapons now worked together on solving shared environmental challenges. The computational models demonstrated something profound. The conflict had been maintained not by fundamental differences, but by systematic isolation. Commander Zarek of the Crystalline Cortex noticed the first true breakthrough during a joint research session. A Void Collective scientist and a Galactic Alliance engineer were discussing a complex quantum engineering problem. Their conversation moved beyond technical details, revealing shared passions, mutual respect, and a genuine excitement for collaborative discovery. The ship's communication systems were instrumental in these connections. Unlike traditional translation technologies, the U.S. Defiance's interfaces captured not just words, but emotional nuances, cultural contexts, and underlying motivational structures. "We are recreating communication," Rodriguez explained to her senior staff, not as a technical process, but as a genuine act of mutual understanding. Holographic collaborative spaces became sites of unexpected creativity. Species that had spent generations developing weapons now found themselves solving complex ecological challenges, designing innovative transportation systems, and exploring fundamental scientific mysteries together. The computational models showed something remarkable. Each successful interaction created exponential possibilities for future cooperation. What had once been a cycle of conflict was transforming into a network of mutual support and shared discovery. Lieutenant Chen's displays tracked these interactions in real time. Complex algorithms demonstrated how each moment of genuine connection reduced systemic tensions by calculating potential future scenarios. The model showed not just peaceful coexistence, but the potential for unprecedented collaborative advancement. Small moments became profound transformations. A Krell-Theory engineer discovered a shared mathematical approach with a crystalline cortex researcher. Their collaborative paper challenged fundamental assumptions about quantum computational theory. A diplomatic assistant from the Void Collective found common ground with a Galactic Alliance cultural historian, revealing shared mythological structures that predated their current civilizations. The U.S. Defiance facilitated these connections with a subtle intelligence that went beyond simple matchmaking. Its systems understood that true understanding came from creating environments where genuine discovery could happen. Systemic connection probability increasing, the ship's AI reported. The statement carried more emotional weight than its clinical phrasing suggested. Commander Zarek observed these interactions with a sense of wonder. The humans had not conquered through force, but through a profound understanding of the most complex system of all: interspecies communication and collaboration. Diplomatic sessions transformed. Where once there were rigid posturing and defensive strategies, now there were collaborative problem-solving sessions. Species that had only known each other through weapon targeting systems now shared meals, discussed scientific challenges, and discovered shared dreams. The computational models showed something unprecedented. The probability of continued conflict was decreasing exponentially with each successful interaction. What had seemed like an impossible divide was being bridged through genuine human-facilitated connection. Captain Rodriguez understood the true mission. This was not about ending a war. It was about creating a new way of understanding each other. The U.S. Defiance stood as a testament to a fundamentally different approach to galactic relations, not as a weapon of conquest, but as an instrument of mutual discovery. Unexpected connections were rebuilding the galaxy, one conversation at a time. The final moments of the conflict dissolved not with a thunderous battle, but with a quiet, profound transformation that would reshape galactic civilization forever. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the U.S. Defiance, watching as the last defensive systems of the Void Collective surrendered. Her team had done something unprecedented. They had ended a war without conventional destruction, dismantling an entire conflict through computational precision and strategic empathy. Lieutenant Marcus Chen completed the final systemic reconstruction protocols. Holographic displays showed the intricate web of connections they had carefully woven, economic pathways, communication networks, and collaborative research initiatives that would bind the previously hostile civilizations together more effectively than any traditional peace treaty. Conflict resolution protocols complete, the ship's AI announced, its voice carrying a subtle undertone of professional satisfaction. Commander Zarek of the Crystalline Cortex understood now what the humans had truly accomplished. This was not a military victory. It was a fundamental reimagining of galactic civilization. The surrender of the Void Collective happened through a series of collaborative discussions rather than traditional capitulation. Their leadership found themselves participating in problem-solving sessions that revealed the true nature of their long-standing conflict, a complex system of misunderstandings, resource competitions, and deliberately maintained tensions. Quantum communication networks that the U.S. Defiance had established began to show something remarkable. Species that had been enemies for generations were now sharing scientific discoveries, collaborative economic initiatives, and unprecedented cultural exchanges. "We are not ending a war," Rodriguez had explained during the final diplomatic session. "We are creating a new way of existing together." The computational models demonstrated the profound shift. Economic systems that had once driven conflict were being redesigned to create mutual benefit. Communication technologies developed during the war were being repurposed to foster understanding. Weapon research facilities were being transformed into joint scientific research centers. Lieutenant Chen's displays tracked the exponential potential of these new connections. Each successful collaboration increased the probability of continued peace by factors that defied traditional diplomatic understanding. The U.S. Defiance had become more than a warship or a diplomatic platform. It was a living symbol of a fundamentally different approach to galactic relations, one that viewed conflict as a complex system to be understood and transformed, rather than a problem to be solved through force. Entire industries began to shift. Military manufacturing complexes were being converted into collaborative research centers. Communication technologies developed for warfare were being repurposed for cultural exchange and scientific discovery. The Krelthari war captain, who had once commanded devastating assault squadrons, now led a joint environmental restoration project. Void Collective engineers worked alongside Galactic Alliance researchers to develop sustainable energy technologies that would benefit multiple species. Commander Zarek observed these transformations with a sense of wonder. The humans had approached the conflict with a level of computational and strategic thinking that transcended traditional military or diplomatic approaches. "We are creating a new computational model of civilization," Rodriguez explained to her senior staff. The final surrender was not a moment of defeat, but a moment of collective discovery. The Void Collective's leadership participated in collaborative problem-solving sessions that revealed the true nature of their long-standing conflict, a complex system of misunderstandings that had been maintained through deliberate isolation. Quantum communication networks began to reveal hidden connections. Species that had only known each other through weapon targeting systems now shared scientific discoveries, economic initiatives, and cultural exchanges. The U.S. Defiance stood as a testament to a fundamentally different approach to galactic relations. It was not a weapon of conquest, but an instrument of mutual understanding and collaborative potential. Lieutenant Chen's final computational analysis showed something unprecedented. The probability of future conflict had been reduced to nearly zero. What had seemed like an impossible divide had been transformed into a network of mutual support and shared discovery. Captain Rodriguez understood the true mission. This was not about winning a war. It was about creating a new way of existing together. As the last defensive systems went offline, a new galactic civilization began to emerge, not through conquest, but through understanding, not through force, but through connection. The galaxy would never be the same.